assume that buyers have to come in to this thing with integrity. And when they say, I'm not planning to change anything, that has to be your plan. Because if you're planning to create a revolution within the business, tell them. Chances are they're going to retain some sort of ownership. There will be an earn-out or other type of agreement, which will cause a lot of tension if you're not forthcoming about your plan.
Who is your successor? Probably going to end up being your buyer. And the easy way to build that succession plan outside of your firm, if you don't have a potential partner inside your firm, is to just look and say, look, I think you do great things. We're in similar practice areas. I'd love to develop something that if something happens to me or when I'm ready to retire, that I can go to you and say, here.
Hi there. I have a small but really meaningful favor to ask you. I watch at the stats on our YouTube channel and Spotify channel, wherever most people listen and watch our podcast. And I see that over 80% of everybody who listens to it regularly is not a subscriber. I'm asking you to subscribe to this channel. And the reason for that is my mission and the mission of my team is to help as many small law firm owners to learn how to transform their law firms into better businesses, and so they in turn enjoy better lives. When you hit subscribe button, you tell these platforms that this is content worth listening, worth viewing, and they in turn will show it to many other small law firm owners and hopefully help me fulfill our mission of helping them create a better business and enjoy better lives. So would you please do me this favor? It would mean the world to me, and hit the subscribe button. And my promise to you is that I will continue to work hard at creating good content with practical ideas that help you and your teams grow better law firms. Thank you. Welcome to another episode of GLF, the podcast that is focused on growing law firms. I have an amazing guest here who has been on this podcast before, and I welcome back Tom Lenfestey. Tom is the founder and CEO of Law Practice Exchange. As far as I know, it is the only marketplace for buying and selling law firms. And I'm very excited to have Tom back on the show.
Yeah, Sasha, thanks for having me back. Glad to have the opportunity to continue the conversation.
Absolutely. If you haven't heard our first episode, it aired on May 29th. Check it out on Spotify, YouTube, wherever you may be listening. Tom is an absolute wealth of information, and there's more than one way to grow a business. You can grow it organically, which for most law firms is about 4.3% per year. Snail pace. For aggressive growing law firms, you could see 25 and more percent per year, but there is way to grow it much faster by buying a law firm, integrating with another law firm, or if you're inclined to not start a law firm, but hit the ground running by buying an existing law firm, you can also do that. And to people who know a little bit about this could be very alluring. You're basically buying cash flow at usually 3 times the cash flow. So if the law firm kicks off $250,000 in net profit pre-tax, you're paying like 3 times that amount, and you're now an existing law firm owner. But the process is actually not that simple. So today, Tom is going to share with us the actual deal process, the deal killers, the missteps that people make, and what does a deal team look like on the seller side and the buyer side.
Absolutely. Excited to talk about, really the nuts and bolts, right?
Yeah.
And as we talk about or talk to a lot of attorneys, Sasha, over the last, several years of doing this, there's lots that are interested in potentially buying. There's lots that are interested in potentially selling. I think where, so many get hung up is knowing what the process is, knowing how to really complete it, because again, it's not like you've bought a law firm or sold a law firm before. For most of them, some have, right? They're repeat customers, but on most of it, it's really, how would this work? And so knowing the process, educating, especially as lawyers, because we like that education to be informed consumers, but it makes it also powerful because it's really how to get to the goal of not just selling, not just buying, but successfully selling or successfully buying if you know the process and the steps that you shouldn't skip, right? Those deal killers to kind of go through that or anything else. And then, as you mentioned, what we'll talk about today as well as the advisors, Attorneys, I think overall are getting better at seeking, advisory help from others, not trying to do it all on their own. Better, right? But there is a challenge for us because I think even that term of being competent, right? We're like, oh, we can learn how to do this. We can teach ourselves how to do this. But really, it's a space, as you kind of mentioned, huge opportunity to grow, huge opportunity to, sell and monetize the value of your firm. But if you don't have the right team helping you, you will make missteps. So I think that's the key part is, making sure you know the process, know who should be on your team, and really how to get to that success at the end. Not just get to the end, I bought something, I sold something, but make sure, truly it's a win-win for both parties.
All right, so let's talk about the process. What does a process look like from the buyer side?
Yeah, absolutely. So from a buyer side and a seller side, we really break it up into 3 steps. First step or first phase is your discovery mode. As a buyer, right, in discovery, you're really getting, a strategy together. What is your strategic plan for acquisition? And I'll give kind of an example of this, Sasha. We have, 5 times as many buyers contact a law practice exchange as sellers. So we have way more buyers contacting us than sellers. Now, part of that's, sellers actually have to age, retire, get motivated to do exit planning or succession planning. But overall, the biggest thing is those buyers really just qualify themselves because, they come in and they say, I want to buy a law firm. Okay. What kind of law firm do you want to buy? I'm open to all practice areas. Okay, well, what kind of practice area do you practice, right? Well, I do estate planning and this. Well, you probably don't want to buy, a personal injury, or maybe you do, but, you probably don't want to buy this type. So it's really knowing, right, like what would be that strategic fit. And then even with locations, right, looking at it as a strategic growth. If, they're working with good marketing advisors, right, and they've got a strategic growth and marketing plan, making sure that their acquisition is going to fit their goals for growth, truly. And the hard part, I think, is there's not always an immediate opportunity in the marketplace. There's not always something to buy to fit that need. And so lawyers that are interested in buying sometimes stretch and they say, okay, well, there's no estate planning practice available in my town right now. So I'm going to jump and say, yeah, sure, I'll start doing real estate law. No, it's the wrong move. It's really knowing what is the strategic fit for your goals, right? To grow revenue, but how do you want to grow revenue? Do you want to diversify practice areas, add new markets, stay within the same practice areas, anything else? So in our discovery phase, it's really about determining your strategic acquisition or buy plan. What is that? What does that really look like to you as a buyer? And making sure that, hey, look, just because something's not on the market right now and you can't buy right now, having the plan and really knowing what fits, what's going to fit for your practice and firm is much better to sit and wait for that to become available or go search for that than to jump at something that's not the right strategic fit. The other part of discovery is...
Sorry to interrupt for a second, but I think this is a really important point. What is, if you have that number, what is an average time from beginning of search to completion of search? Is there a metric like this?
Yeah, informal metric, I would tell you, some hit it right away because there's an opportunity. But when you really go into search mode, some lawyers and firms have been searching for, months or years for that right opportunity. Right. I mean, part of our goal, you mentioned building our marketplace that we have at the Law Practice Exchange, is to shorten that, right? Come to the marketplace, like be able to search, keep current on potential opportunities and allow sellers to easily match. So, that time can take take longer, but also once you know what you really want, and if we kind of play this forward, if you decide that you're a personal injury attorney, and that's what you are, right? This is what you do. You don't need to do estate planning, criminal law, anything else, and you want to grow geographically, right? So you've got your market locked down and growth and everything else, but 2 metros over, you don't have that market. Or in another state or anything else. So then you really know personal injury, but in this market, you determine your funding, which is kind of part of the discovery phase as well. How much can you afford, right? Just like buying a house, you want to make sure like you've gotten pre-qualified with a funding partner, like a SBA lender, equity group, whoever's going to help you with this, and go, and then you can reach out and start searching, right? There's attorneys based on age, demographic, just to open up conversations to really help expedite that. I mean, the Law Practice Exchange, we do that for buyer clients, is we go on search to help them speed up that process and, navigate a little bit the conversations early on to make sure the parties are meeting in that structure. So it can take a while, but actually having your true fit goals and, that assessment and strategic plan really does help streamline it, especially if you can put some effort specifically into outreach and contacting.
Great.
And then, as we're talking about that discovery phase for buyers, you have to get the right team ready, right? If you find the opportunity. So one of the biggest challenges that we see between buyers and sellers, you find a good opportunity. You're a buyer and you find that personal injury practice in another town, another city. It's a potential good fit. But then what? You've had a good conversation with seller's interested, pending how this is all going to work. But how does it move forward? And that's really where having, maybe you have a firm administrator that's a CPA or accountant, but having a good qualified, like fractional CFO, a good accountant who can really take on, numbers. Of course, we do this too from deal advisory and everything else, but really take on financials, look at the opportunity, help you build out, how would this work? How would this really work if we acquired this? Does what we have as one plus what we would be acquiring as one equal 2? Does it equal 1.5 because it's actually going to pull resources away from what we're trying to do? Or can 1 + 1 actually equal 3? Can we take these two, eliminate some costs, streamline some things, and really get things to grow? And so, having a good CPA or accountant on your team, having a good, marketing, advisor as well, because when you integrate two potential brands, there are a lot of marketing questions to go with that, right?
Absolutely.
And we advise, like, if you're a buyer, especially if you're looking at a significant buy, having these individuals on the team early, because they will help with like asking the right questions, planning things out. And then the other, as I kind of mentioned, is of course, having your lender. Most law firm acquisition deals are going to require some form of capital. And you could, of course, have that, but also to have an SBA, pre-commitment. It lets the sellers know you're committed and you're funded. Just like, again, going to buy a house or a condo or anything else, you need that, pre-qualified letter, to have a buyer, or a seller take you serious. And that would be the same thing. So know what your goals are, know what your strategic, search is, and then having that right team in place is discovery phase for the buyer.
And I want to add a couple of quick points to everything that you just said. Number one, do not make the mistake of going to your tax preparer for CFO level advice. Could they? They could. Is there a high probability that they'll be wrong? There's a very high probability that they'll be wrong. A guy or gal who does your taxes will not give you good financial advice, probably, because that's not what they do. You need to go to someone who is a CFO certified or chief financial officer type of a person who actually knows how to build a business based on finance. It's fine to have an accountant audit the seller's books. Perfectly fine. They'll find what you will not find because that's what they do. It's not a good idea to go to them for financial advice. You have to do a CFO. And as far as you mentioned SBA loan, it's worth mentioning that SBA, Small Business Administration, provides 7A type loans for acquisition of small business. I believe it's called 7A, and it's up to $3.5 million. So you could get financing for certain types of businesses, including law firms, with as little as 10% down, and they'll finance if it makes sense. And this is where it's great because you will also get some advisory from the lender. If it doesn't make sense, they'll tell you we cannot fund this because the numbers don't make sense. But yeah, you can get good financing.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Sasha. And SBA's, upped it to, I think they'll end up to $5 million on those. And
I did not know that.
Yeah. So now they've even increased it, and they've had some, different incentives floating around as well. But, the SBA is still the lender's decision. And I think to your point, it's a great one. And what we've encouraged buyers to do, whether you use lending or not, having a bank review it, right, from an independent and say, we don't like it, right? Well,
Yeah.
then that gives you an idea of maybe I don't like it either, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not going to finance, it's not going to cash flow. And SBA terms are pretty favorable based on the repayment term and everything else. So they work pretty well. So if it can't really cash flow under those type of loan terms, then, potentially you're paying too much, or you need to restructure that deal, or it's not the right deal for you at all. And so they're almost like a free advisor, a free,
Yeah.
another opinion to do so, which is, huge when you're just trying to explore, right? So
Yeah.
getting paired with a good lender who's going to give you good advice, do that review is key. That's a great point.
Let me hear your advice on this also. Not all SBA lenders are created equal, although the guidelines are the guidelines, but different SBA lenders may view risk differently. Because of that, there are certain searchers that will go to up to 3 SBA lenders and will have them review deals. Usually there is a nominal fee for review. It could be substantial, but even if you invest $5,000, $10,000 into getting that review, that can save you hundreds of thousands, if not more, down the road. Worth it. Do not save money on due diligence. It will cost you a lot more down the road, and quickly. You'll learn that quickly within months of acquisition.
That's absolutely right. And, to your point, so we have our trusted partners, as lenders that lend to law firms or lend on law firm deals. Because, over a decade of doing this, we've had, to your point, other just, banks that do SBA lending, and they don't really do SBA lending for law firms, right? Or for law firm transactions. And so the sad part of that is it's not just that, it's more time. It's also typically more cost to, the buyers, because they go through just more headaches to get there. So, just like anything else, going for marketing of somebody that understands law firms, going to brokerage that somebody understands law firms, you would want to go to a lender that understands law firms and what you're trying to do based on that acquisition. Makes it so much more beneficial as their advisory, aspect that can come in, but also just getting the deal done when that time comes, it's going to be far better.
Who would you go to actually value the business?
Us, the Law Practice Exchange. So that's a key part of what we do is standalone valuations. We do those for some of our institutional, or what we call our elite buyers, that really are on an acquisition roll-up strategy. Like their goal is to acquire X number of firms in these markets over the next few years. And so for those, we're doing, valuations, helping them. But for a lot of law firm owners, they come to us just to get a benchmark. Maybe they're interested in selling 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the road. But, I think for a lot of them, as we do more of this, right? Like you're out there talking about building value in your firm through doing good things. They ask the question, well, what is my value right now? Right. And so that's the opportunity for us, really, again, as we lead the marketplace, part of it is, we've been collecting data deals for 10 years. Right. So it's not just giving advice on, oh, well, here's what the guides say or anything else, but it's really deploying of, we've been leading the marketplace for buying, selling, succession, and being able to really deploy that data for here is where your value is today. If you potentially can do these things, here's what's going to improve the value going forward. Right. So I think in our previous one, you and I may have talked a little bit about, systems and good marketing, firm branding, right? Like those are things like if you're here now and, you're not really immediately want to sell, you're not, in the market for succession. You just want to know if I'm building and am I building right? And I think that's the opportunity to really say, take a benchmark and then improve on it, right? Know what you're building. And especially if you're building on it for exit, which is really cool in my world, because I don't think that was ever talked about 10 years ago when I started. But now I'm really seeing more of those entrepreneurial attorneys who are coming and saying, I'm building this to exit it, in 10 years. And so I just want to make sure we're doing the right thing. But on valuation, again, if you're a buyer exploring a deal, we do tons of buy-side valuations to look and make sure that works, as well, of course, our sellers for, their sales and succession planning as well.
Such an important point. If you already own a law firm, you should get it valued every 2-3 years. Not with your accountant, again, not with your account, not the right person, with a professional who understands what a business is actually worth and how to value them. And the reason why I think it's very important, if you own a law firm, it's supposed to be an asset that you will exit from by default because you retire and can't sell it, or by design because you actually plan it and know how much you want to offload it for. And when you do it by design, valuing the business periodically gives you that goalpost. Like, are you moving in the right direction? Warren Buffett's of the world, they're valuing their businesses every year to see whether they're creating more shareholder value, standing still, or declining. That's really, as an owner of a law firm, you can be a leader, you can be practicing attorney without your law firm, but that's really the goal. It's not how much money you're making today, it's whether what you're creating is valuable or not, because you can have a job and make plenty of money in the job. You don't necessarily have to own a law firm.
Well, that's right. And, knowing the value of what you have, it's just, knowing how much money you have in the bank, right? Knowing how much value you have tied to your law firm really allows you to plan for, well, when is my exit going to be, right? Like, what's that timeline? What does it look like? Because if you've got $1 million or a $10 million firm, right, that should matter on how long you have to keep running that firm or building that firm or otherwise to do that. And the other part that, Sasha, is something that we see quite often amongst different partnerships. So we do a lot of solo owned, firms because, they're owned, they're controlled, those owners can make decisions, but we do a lot of succession planning. And as part of the valuation component for partnerships and larger firms. And the biggest challenge is when they come late in the game and they say, hey, we've got a partner that's getting ready to retire, probably another 1-2 years away. We've got some younger ones, whatever else. And we really just need to know our valuation because we want to build out, a retirement exit model to do this. And the challenge is at that point, probably you've got 6 equity partners. You've got maybe at least 4 or 5 different opinions on what value means for the firm.
Mismatched expectations.
Right. And so if we come in and give a market value, it may be way higher, right, than somebody thought, usually probably the younger attorney coming in who would be forced with, paying that. They've just never thought of it that way, right, as kind of building that out. And then it's just really getting that point where we've told, those clients that come to us, look, again, valuation is where it all starts. Getting agreement on value, if you get past that hurdle of, we agree on the concept of what value means for our firm, you can do anything. You can develop a succession plan, you can develop an exit strategy, right? But if you can't get past that, if there's too much disagreement, succession planning isn't possible, right? Because you will just have too much disagreement, and you'll probably have a partner who thinks their firm's, their practice is worth 8 million, and you've got one down here that thinks it's only 50,000. That partner that's 8, they may depart, right? They may spin off and do something else because they really feel that, or the younger one will. And that's the challenge you face with not having a concept or an agreement on valuation in a multi-partner firm.
And there is an easy way to prevent this from happening, and that is having a buy-sell agreement that actually spells out, and this could be 10, 15, 20 years looking into the future, how the exit or how valuation is going to be done. And I know a ton about this because my partner and I have just concluded working on our buy-sell agreement, and we've been working together as partners for 6.5 years. We have a number, but now we formalized it.
Yeah.
So I've been buying equity in our company over the years, but now we put it on paper. So one day, if one of us suddenly passes away, or we decide to part ways, our attorney has drafted an agreement that says our attorney will be responsible for bringing independent parties who are going to value our business. There will be 2 parties that will value the business. If opinions are greatly apart, they will be, the attorneys, not us, responsible for finding a 3rd party that's going to value the business. And then it's going to be, there's a formula that actually establishes what the value will be.
Yeah.
If we ever have a disagreement, and we have a client, just talked to them this morning, the partnership is breaking apart. They're bickering. What's the value of the firm?
Right.
Can't agree on it, but one partner has to go. It's a terrible situation, but if you put it in writing years ahead, you do not have to face that situation at all. You know exactly how it will be executed.
And I know we're off topic maybe from buyer discovery
Yeah,
phase, but I think this is really important. And your point, Sasha, what we've really encouraged, even when you don't have a partner, maybe you're a solo, a small partnership or anything else, but there's, a peer, a good next generation attorney. We really believe in doing buy sell agreements outside the firm, right? So,
explain that.
you're a solo owner, right? Doing estate planning and anything else, and the town next door has a solo estate planning attorney that you really respect, think is awesome, right? You're not ready to sell, but under a disaster situation, if something were to happen to you, you can enter into an
Uh,
assumption buy sell agreement with somebody, right, next town over who is your successor, probably going to end up being your buyer. And the easy way to build that succession plan outside of your firm, if you don't have a potential partner inside your firm, is to just look and say, look, I think you do great things. We're in similar practice areas. I'd love to develop something that if something happens to me or when I'm ready to retire, that I can go to you and say, here. And just like you and your partner did, you can agree on a concept for how that will be valued, how it will be paid, right? To really set up your succession plan, even if you don't have a partner, even if you don't
Interesting.
have a natural associate to take over your practice.
Never thought about that. That's a really interesting insight.
Well, we like it because, especially in smaller communities, otherwise, where there may be a lack of associates, right? There may be a lack, but the community over may have that great next generation attorney that's doing a great job, and that could be your potential successor, right?
Yeah,
So,
super
looking at
interesting.
those different things and just thinking outside the box, being creative, but using those core principles. Hey, if we can agree on valuation and terms now, I mean, it's a great disaster plan, right? To make sure that if disaster strikes. But on the flip side, if my retirement timeline is 10 or 15 years away and we keep a good relationship, then, when I get to that point, it's like, hey, you ready to buy? I'm ready to retire. And it's already built. It's already there from that side. And everybody always asks, well, what if something happens, right? What if that other attorney, you don't like them anymore? Well, attorneys are great contingency planners, and in any good agreement, there could be an exit clause or anything else from that side if you needed to do that. So it's not locking yourself in for 15 years. It's just trying to pre-structure as much as you can.
Yeah, super. Now I'm thinking if I was an attorney listening to this, whether I wanted to buy or sell my business, I'm like, especially if I wanted to sell my business one day, well, how much is it worth? What's the valuation model? And does your main practice area or the only practice area play a role when it comes to valuing the business?
Yeah, it really does. Because we do market valuations, right? And I tell everybody, building this marketplace, right, which we created a software application to help, welcome you into our community, educate you on buying and selling. And then when you're ready to buy or when you're ready to sell, you can direct connect, right? Confidentially, everything else, direct connect with buyer potentials, seller potentials. And then, our team's there to help as needed, but really it's an easy intro to learn, prepare, and when you're ready to actually transact. And to your point on the valuation market right now, like personal injury is a very active practice area. There's lots of buyers looking for certain types of firms in personal injury, right? And so if you are sitting there in this space, good firm, good financials, great brand, good marketing, right, doing all of this, then you will probably get a higher value, right, than maybe an estate planning firm that works on personal referrals otherwise, in the same metro market, anything else, just because there's more brand and there's more buyers willing to take on risk, um, under a personal injury metric than maybe an estate planning metric.
What
So,
if all factors were equal? Everything
mhm,
was the same. The only difference, profitability was the same, revenue was the same, brand awareness was the same, marketing, everything. But
mhm.
one is PI, another one is estate planning. Would valuation still be different because there is more demand for PI firms?
Yep. There would be, the valuation would probably be higher because, again, there's more of a market acceptance. There's more buyers in the market willing to pay more on better terms, for that. I mean, I know, and most of, the listeners know, there's still a lot of differences between an estate planning practice and a PI. One of the reasons that personal injury typically demands a higher valuation is they've spent a lot of time building out the firm marketing, right? Hopefully they have. If not, they should, talk to you and, your team to make sure they do the right things. But overall, they've spent that time building out firm marketing. A lot of estate planning firms still operate, some in the digital marketing space, but still operate on personal marketing, network, referrals. And that has a transition risk upon sale, right? That all of our buyers see and everything else. Plus, you're probably selling to another estate planning firm, which haven't, probably advanced their business systems as much as some of our personal injury firms. That's kind of a blank statement. We know there's great estate planning firms out there that far surpass some of the other personal injury, but that's just a comparative analysis there's more buyers, there's more market demand, and you've probably done some stuff because of the practice area that's etched you up into a better business box overall.
What about family law? Where do they fit in?
Yeah. So family law, we transact family law firms all the time. We have, I'm sure, a couple on the marketplace right now. It's traditionally been a good practice area, but it's tough, and it's been tough the last few years. So family law is a good example of they can be very profitable. They can have built a good brand, but finding buyers to get excited about buying family law has been a challenge. And the reason is not because you don't have entrepreneurial family law attorneys. The reason more is a lot of them have been very busy for the last several years. So it hasn't been really looking for more work. It's getting the work done and hiring good attorneys to help them get the work done has been a common focus. And actually, some of the deal killers we've had are like, I'd buy that firm if it came with 5 attorneys, but I don't want to buy this $1 million revenue firm if it doesn't come with any attorneys, right? Well, the only attorney wants to retire and exit. I don't need that revenue. I need attorneys to really process some of that. And I think that's slowing down a little bit for family law attorneys, and it will change back to normalcy. But since they've been so busy and they've been in need of good quality attorneys as part of their team, they haven't been aggressively pursuing growth because it's come through natural marketing. And even if they grew overnight, that growth has to be supported by more attorneys. And they've just had a challenge really, keeping that funded and fueled.
I'm going to make an admission that if today I was on the market for a law firm, I would be looking for a family law. Absolutely. The reason for that is it's virtually impossible to replace family law with AI. There's always demand. Average case value is high enough to justify substantial marketing. And because most family law attorneys have no idea how to market effectively, you can enter with an existing brand and start dominating the market within 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you at all.
Great practice area.
Yeah. And I think, from that standpoint, it becomes a recruiting good talent, right? Making good systems and process so that you're not leaving a talent or those attorneys on an island, right? It's really building out systems that can support them more than some, other firms. But yeah, I don't disagree with you. I mean, so much focus, Sasha, to your point, is on personal injury. I mean, even us, we talk about it a lot, but there is great practice areas and significant movement in others. Immigration is another one. Intellectual property, because there's a lot of movement and kind of other things that comes into play. But family law, if you're looking to roll up, and I've always said that they're kind of following the path of personal injury, but not as much, right? But the case values are high, like you said, significant high case values. Demand is great.
Yep.
Consumer choice, like you try to say, you need me now, and they say, yes, I need you now, and they're going to engage quickly compared to some other practices of law that have slow consumer decision. Yeah, I mean, I think it would be tremendous. And of course, we do have firms out there as well, looking to grow and roll up to be more regional, national family law firms, based on what you said. I mean, they see the value in it, and they just need to, bring the right team and the right people. And a lot of good family law attorneys out there, they just need to find the right home.
What's the valuation model for most relatively small law firms?
Yeah, most of it is based on a multiple of earnings, right? So when we talk about earnings, we're talking really about your net cash flow after all expenses, everything else is paid, right? So to some attorneys, it's adjusted net income or EBITDA, earnings before income taxes, depreciation, amortization, right? But at a base level, if you're running an everyday small law firm, it's really, you bring this much in client payments, right? Your revenues. You have these expenses to pay, like your paralegals, your office expense, right? Marketing, everything else. And then you should be paying yourself a fair salary for the legal work and the work that you're doing that produces revenue. So that's a key point, because we run into a lot of times where attorneys say, oh, I have a $700,000 revenue firm and I make 400 and some $1,000 a year. And we're like, well, that's a tremendous profit margin. And when we get into it, they don't pay themselves any salary.
Right.
But if they had to pay themselves a salary or they had to replace themselves, it would cost 200,000. So really you have a $700,000 gross revenue firm, subtract out that 200,000 replacement salary you should have been paying, and you're making 200. Still a good margin, not bad, but it's just, a little bit different, because that's the net earnings, or what we call the true owner benefit. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
if you own a business, and a law firm is a business, you want benefit from ownership, right? You want that business to pay you profits, right? Dividends, distributions, whatever you want to call it, but you want to make profit from that business without just your efforts. Your efforts can be part of it, but at the end of each month, quarter, year, whatever, you want some cash coming to you. That's why you own a business,
Are
right?
you saying the name on the door is not enough?
The name on the door is great. It's good, right? It's good. Probably could be rebranded, right? But the name on the door is great. And for a lot, I know law was a calling, but you have probably developed a business. And when you look at it and get to it, that's what a buyer is going to pay for. They're going to pay for what you're able to receive on a monthly, quarterly, annual basis from this business that can be transferred to them. And not every dollar might be transferable. There might be some adjustments you have to make and everything else. But under that firm example we were giving, if 200,000 a year is what you truly are taking home from this business after everybody, including yourself or a replacement for you, has been paid, that's a nice little return, right? And if we're looking to value that, typically in the marketplace, it's going to be somewhere on a very low end, probably around a 2 times that. So you're talking about 400,000. On a higher end, it's going to be 3 to 3.5, 4, depending on the practice area. And of course, we have larger firms that just want to break through that because their profit margin and earnings are much more significant. But for your everyday firm, you're going to be between 2 and 3, right? So you get to say, okay, my true owner's benefit is $200,000 a year. It's worth between 4 and 600,000. That can make you excited. That can make you less excited, for that or anything else. But if you're looking at your exit and retirement, and you know that, wait a minute, I could get, 600,000 for my firm, that can either move your timeline up, right? It can move your timeline back. But overall, that's a value concept that to me has been overlooked in our profession for years and can really help attorneys move when it comes to developing succession to preserve that value, transfer it to somebody else, right? Take care of clients, the employees, everything else.
Where do you need to be with EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization, like pure profit? Where do you need to be with, by the way, for those of you who may be like, why do you need to subtract out interest? Because when you sell a business, you have to pay off the debt that the business has. So you're buying a business without debt, or that's the way it's supposed to be, unless you're acquiring
Right.
the debt, but then it has to be factored in. So where do you need to be with EBITDA to make it more exciting, to go from the 2 to 3 times EBITDA to maybe 4, 5, 6, 7?
40%, 50% of your revenues, right? And I
Has to be
mean, if
profit.
yeah, I mean, if we're talking about, that as far as an EBITDA multiple, really the groups out there looking right now to pay like a 4 or 5 are looking for at least 10 million in EBITDA. So that means,
You have a
right,
big business. You have a
you
big
own a big
business to do that.
business, right?
Yeah.
And so for most of those are our personal injury attorneys,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Sure.
They've built big businesses. Again, we have estate planning firms doing that. I'm not saying that at all, but for the typical in the market. That's going to be your personal injury or your plaintiff firms.
Yep.
You know, less than that, will it work on a high profit margin? Absolutely. Less than that with really significant growth trends and plans? Yeah, right. And less than that, but super efficient. You've built systems, right? You're doing everything, and it's really can be shown as this business is not a transition or a transfer risk. It's like I could go away for 3 weeks or 3 months and the business would keep going. Then, yeah, you're going to get a higher multiple and better payment terms on that.
Mm-hmm.
And the coolest part, Sasha, and I know you know this too, in helping firms is seeing the uniqueness of what some firms are building, and for our side, like watching the market react to that. Because several years ago they'd be like, it's a law firm, but now they're like, oh, this attorney
Service
has built
business.
something that is a law firm,
Yeah.
delivers great client service, but behind the scenes, I mean, it really looks more like a tech firm, right?
Yeah.
Like they built so much supporting systems and everything else to that and everything. So it's really neat to see that and watch the market react, which is the good part of moving value up, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we see all
It's,
sorts.
it's such a good point for somebody who may be tech inclined, but is deferring investment into your technology. You may have a buyer that will look at your business and it may be doing that two, 400, $500,000 in EBITDA, but they will not value it at 3 times that EBITDA. They will value it at 5 or 6 because they're not buying that. They're buying your technology stack, the way that you built it. And all of a sudden, like if they buy your processes, their operations become a lot more efficient.
Yeah. I mean, it's really cool because, of course, you see other businesses that have done this, but, we've got firms that have, 3 to 4, 5 engineers on their staff permanently, right? For just,
Software engineers.
Mhm. They have software, they have IEs, right? Which industrial engineers just looking at process flow.
Oh, that's
And
bigger.
yeah, I mean,
That's
really,
bigger. Yeah.
and the goal is, do we have a system to make us more efficient? If we
Mm.
don't, we need to develop one. And then can we automate or build that or, update or integrate something to make us better, right? Make us more efficient, deliver better client service, better value from that. And I mean, that seems so foreign maybe for your everyday law firm. But I think with certain things moving like AI and otherwise, there's going to be components that you'll be able to interlock and deliver more value, do it more efficiently, right? To kind of carry that forward. So it'll be interesting.
Fascinating. So you set your goals, you hire your deal team if you're on the buyer side, or you hire your sell team if you're on the selling side. Now you're in the process. What are the common deal killers? Like what happens in the process where it just falls apart?
Yeah, our first one really is, one, if you've skipped that, like knowing your goals. So if you're a buyer, right, knowing your goals. If you're a seller, also, it's what is really your strategic buy fit, knowing who that ideal buyer is and what are your goals to selling. Because sellers, the real deal killer that we see with any deal, probably the number one is seller emotions. And it's not a bad thing. Like, I'm not saying like sellers are blowing up and yelling at everybody. It's really an emotional block. For a lot of our sellers, they've been an attorney, a lawyer for 30 years, 35, 40 years, 50 years, right? And when they get to the point of selling, all sorts of emotional, they don't even realize it, roadblocks. They say all the right things. I want to sell anything else, but fear kind of, weaves itself into that. And that's really something to just know as a potential buyer. And of course, as a potential seller, different things like, oh, I don't think this is the right buyer, or I need more money than this. Those are probably not true. You're just, you're focusing on, this is beyond my comfort level. Like I'm going to be replaced. I'm going to no longer control my firm, right? And so the biggest thing is what we have traditionally done is work with our sellers on, you need to paint the picture of what really you need, what kind of deal you would accept, right? And when it comes to the ideal buyer, sure, have that down, but also be open to all sorts of others. Because as the next generation of firms change, So do your buyers, right? So
Yeah.
you've been a solo owner, practicing attorney here, and this other firm comes in very interested in doing this, great reputation, wants to do that. But their goal is they're going to actually deploy, fractional attorneys that rotate in and out of market, with this. And you're like, no, it just won't work. Well, before you do that, because there's a fear over, I've been doing it this way, and now somebody's trying to change that. Before you do that, really look at what is the problem? And a lot of times the problem is an emotional roadblock. And as I shared earlier, we see 5 times as many buyers as sellers that are coming to the market right now. A lot of that's just because of seller emotional roadblock. There is a fear over retirement for lawyers. If I'm a lawyer and I retire, what do I call myself?
Who am I without this thing?
Who am I? If I no longer have my law firm, what do I do? I've been at this 6 days a week, 7 days a week for 40, 50 years. What do I do? Right? And of course they're like, oh, spouse wants to travel. I want to spend time with grandkids, all this other aspect. But it is. I would say that's our number one deal killer is seller emotions. And that's not a fault to the sellers. I think it's the most is recognize it early. And if you're a buyer, know it's there, right? So a big thing to closing deals is not the financials. Those usually aren't our deal killers.
Mm,
It's really the transition plan.
that is
How are
surprising.
how are things going to happen once seller, turns over the reins to buyer? And if you're a buyer and you can really spell out a good, solid transition plan, and as an example, if you've been running a firm, Sasha, and you've been in your community for 40 years, I'm coming in to be a buyer. My response could be like, "Oh, I've got all this technology, I've got a marketing plan, I'm going to roll, we're going to change." Or I could be like, "Sasha, you built a great firm. My first goal is not to change anything, right? I don't want to disrupt what you've built. Over time, we will integrate and do that. But my goal is to preserve what you've built." And for you, Sasha, if you want to stay on as the owner, if you want to stay on afterwards in a transition, you tell me what your timeline is. I'd love to have you as a practicing attorney, right?
Sure.
I want to make sure to retain all of your people, right? Go through that and really develop and say, when it comes to integrating your referral sources, we'll work together, right? Buyer, seller working together to go through and take them to coffee, take them to lunch, right? Go through this. We'll put forth that effort. And your firm name and marketing, you've done a great job. You've hired a great marketing company. You've got this. We're going to keep that as is for now and just file a DBA. And then we'll slowly integrate it over time,
Mm-hmm.
right? We'll merge it over time, but we don't want to disrupt. To a seller who has that emotional roadblock, they just heard not a lot's going to change. Everybody's going to be taken care of, including them, right? And there is a solid, well thought out plan to really transitioning with preservation as the goal. Not
Yeah.
change as the goal, preservation. And I think, to most of our sellers, that would mean a lot more so than how much down am I getting versus how much is going to be paid over time,
Yeah.
right? And that sounds weird. Some of our sellers, of course, want to know how much down versus that. But most, it's about, that buyer fit and what the transition plan would look like.
That's fascinating and makes so much sense. And I assume that buyers have to come in to this thing with integrity. And when they say, I'm not planning to change anything, that has to be your plan. Because if you're planning to create a revolution within the business, tell them. Chances are they're going to retain some sort of ownership. There will be an earn out or other type of agreement, which will cause a lot of tension if you're not forthcoming about your plan.
Absolutely. And to that point, Sasha, if you see a firm that needs an overhaul and that is your plan, right? To be open and honest. And if that doesn't work for the seller or anything else, then
Walk.
that's not the deal for you. And
Yeah.
that's not the deal for the seller, right?
Walk.
They're not going to
Yeah.
see it. And they're going to, even if you complete and force that deal through, the seller is not going to work well with you post,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
closing, post sale.
Will be a
And you don't
nightmare.
want that. No,
Will be
absolutely.
absolute nightmare. All right. So that's the number one. Give us second, very, very common deal killer.
Yeah, I think the next one really is, do you have time to devote to the process? And I'll say this to sellers and buyers both, right? Um, especially lawyers. And again, similar clients, we know, you're running the practice, practicing law, everything else, they're busy. But when we have a seller who gets into, the marketplace, and then they have a buyer that says, oh, I'm really interested, I'd love to set up a call. And they say, I'm really busy the next month. I can set up a call, in the next 30 days. You're going to lose that buyer, right? And when the buyer asks you for some financial information and you're slow to respond because you're just, you have to commit the time. And if you're a buyer, it's the same thing, working with your advisors. We talked about that prep. But if you're a buyer and you explore something, you're going to have to commit the time to explore it. And you're going to have to commit the time to review the financials with your fractional CFO. You're going to have to commit the time to structure the deal, right? With, us or somebody else to really help do that. And then you're going to have to commit the time to go through due diligence and close it and develop that transition. And so the best ones that we really see are sellers that have built themselves at least into a role where they have delegated some work and they are in a firm ownership management role, at least fractionally, right? They may still do some legal work, but they're not doing it all, right? They may do, some significant firm management, but they're not doing it all. And the same thing with buyers. The buyers that have moved themselves because of systems, because of investment in that, which you and I just talked about, they move them that they don't have a 2-week trial that they can't, focus on anything else for the next few months. That's when you have the time, great things can happen, right? When you don't have the time, those deals die. And they just die because, parties get uninterested or they feel like there's deal fatigue when really there wasn't any movement. It just took, time that nobody wanted to devote to that process, right? And then, my next probably biggest deal killer would be the financials. Knowing truly if you're a buyer, if you're looking at buying a firm, if you don't know what the value of that firm is, then you need it. And so, getting a valuation through us or working with a CFO to really do a deep dive on financials. And the same thing with the seller. A lot of sellers, again, will, go forward and they'll say, yeah, I've never had a valuation done, but I'm interested in selling. And the buyer will say, well, this is what we're considering offering. And the seller will say, nah, I think it's worth, 3 times that. But they have no clue, right? And we've actually been kind of the next option a lot of times after a seller has killed a deal because they've asked for 3 times that when it was really, 1 times that what was offered. But they come to us and say, yeah, I had somebody offer me this, but I thought it was a ridiculously low offer. And we say, no, that was a good offer. And they've made that misstep, right? They've killed that deal when they really, just need an opinion of what is it that it's worth and how would this deal really work?
I think it's true. And I've been on both sides of the transaction that most sellers overvalue their business and most buyers undervalue the business that they're buying.
Sure.
There's one, and you and I can talk about this for hours and possibly days and weeks, but I respect your time. So I just want to add one touch point, and that is if you're looking to buy a business, if you're looking to buy a law firm, I think you have to set aside a lot of time for integrating yourself into that business. If you have a substantial team, you may not have to invest a lot of your time, but having bought a business, I can tell you that first year, as a buyer of an existing business, and the people who built that business up to the point when I bought it, they didn't leave, they were still there. I've spent majority of my time, year 1, on integrating myself into that business. Again, majority of my time for a year integrating into myself that business. I'm proud to say that this year, our not revenue, but our profit, this is my 7th year in the business, will be 1,000%, 10 times greater than it was 7 years ago. But it's not an overnight thing. Right. 7 years, and first year, again, mostly time on integrating myself into the systems and understanding what can be better.
And that's the key part. I know, Sasha, you opened with the opportunity for acquisition, right? The growth potential. Like, you've 7 times, your profit, or no, excuse me, 10 times your profit over the last 7 years. But it's where you started from, right? You're not starting from zero.
Yeah.
And
it's
I think
lot harder to start from zero.
so many attorneys would look if they start a firm from truly zero, they're not paying themselves and they don't have money to pay others.
Yeah.
If you acquire a firm, you're paying yourself and you have money to pay others. Then to your point, your time is not focused on like, growing from ground roots, running to every coffee meeting, doing everything you could, right? It's really focused on what is going to make this integration work well, right? And I think you're very smart. What you did was that full focus of, this first year is all about making this transition work. After that, it just becomes easier. But if we miss those steps right out of the gate, then we will stumble, right? And we will not see that growth going forward. So that's a hard part because there's so much like legal and financial and other items that kind of come up as we near a closing for a firm. But we really tell everybody the final piece of due diligence is developing that transition plan. How are you going to integrate after purchase? What is the previous owner's role? What is, the new owner's role, and how is that going to work going forward? And you should have that plan, at least a good solid framework for it prior to close. Because what we found is if you have that plan and both parties kind of buy into it prior to close, then the day of closing becomes a lot more exciting. And the day after closing, when you start that integration and the seller is starting to step back or into a different role or anything else, it's just easier. The communications are more fluid. Everybody's focused on the same goal. Hey, we need to set up these 10 meetings because these are our biggest referral sources. Let's get our calendars together, right? And do that. Hey, we need to meet with our marketing team because we're going to talk to them about integration, right? That's part of our transition and integration plan. So yeah, I think what you've done is exactly what we would tell buyers to do and our sellers to do. Focus, communicate, and focus on that transition early, and don't forget about it.
Yeah. And if you're sitting on the fence with this idea of one day buying a law firm, I can tell you definitively, I've built businesses from scratch and I bought an existing business. It is infinitely easier to buy an existing business with all the problems that it has than to start a business from scratch and create all the problems from scratch. So buy a business. It's more profitable. It's faster way to ROI, substantial ROI, but buy it well. And if you own a business, a law firm, and you're thinking about selling it one day, plan that retirement exit well. Don't leave it up to a chance. And Tom, your wealth of information on the subject. How do people connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. The lawpracticeexchange.com. So the lawpracticeexchange.com is where our marketplace is hosted. Of course, you can find me and my team there. You can find us on, LinkedIn, Tom Lenfestey on LinkedIn. That name's a little tricky, so probably the easiest is the lawpracticeexchange.com. But again, we're here as a resource, and Sasha, I'm delighted and for the opportunity to speak with you twice on this, and hopefully we can continue the conversation, because that has really been our passion in developing and growing this marketplace. Is if we can share education and really, I know we didn't get into all of the process steps, but I think as we really walk through a lot of these stories and examples, knowing what's possible, but also knowing the opportunities that's out there is huge. And so for lawyers to really think about it, it will help
100%.
the profession overall. Absolutely.
100%. Tom, thank you so much.
Thanks, Sasha.